The way the transformation happens is when the world sends in emissaries, right, through cracks and the monsters. It is our work to try to create space for the monster to live. And if we do so without trying to rehabilitate the monster, but just radically accompanying it, we might happen upon new realities.
Welcome to Point of Relation with Thomas Hübl, a podcast that illuminates the path to collective healing at the intersection of science and mysticism. This is the Point of Relation.
Bayo Akomolafe, PhD, is a widely celebrated international speaker, posthumanist thinker, poet, teacher, public intellectual, essayist, and the author of We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. He is also the visionary founder of the Emergence Network and host of the online post-activist course, We Will Dance with Mountains.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Bayo. Warm welcome.
Thank you, brother. Good to be here.
It's good to be with you. Every time I see you, it warms my heart, and it's kind of, I feel very connected to you and the way you look at life. It feels very resonant. We had already multiple conversations, and
Wonderful.
and I find in you somebody that has a deep, refreshing, kind of innovative thinking and sensing of the situation. And I think that's exactly what we need nowadays. So we're exploring through different ways how we are relating to this time. Like, on the one hand, how we are dealing with a lot of climate anxiety, climate depression, lack of agency, overwhelm. So on the one hand, on the other hand, many people are looking to, okay, that's a time to be innovative, creative, but all together we are in a kind of in a space that we cannot fully define. And so maybe you can speak a little bit how you look at the current situation in the world, what's helpful, what's maybe not helpful, how do you look at what's happening right now in the world?
Thank you, brother. It's always generative when we speak. I never come prepared. I don't look up any stuff. Right. Right. It just it feels like this is the arena for, it's like a site of possibilities when we speak. And I'm really grateful for our ongoing dance and what it's provoking and helping to see emerge. I love that framing and what it invites me to consider. My mind is running around, is tempted to explore this Marxist phrase about the history of the senses, the idea that senses do not just occur to us. We don't just have senses, we live within sensation, or a sensorium, as I would like to think about it. When many people might think, oh, I have the sense of sight, the sense of smell, the sense of taste, touch, I have the sense of hearing, but that's a very reductionistic way of thinking about it. I think we live in a field of sensing, and that prohibits and encourages different kinds of realities. Given that scaffolding, that framing, I think something is spilling through our sensorium that is potentially disruptive and world-ending. And this is what I call the monster. Now, when I speak about monster, many people immediately recoil because we have culturally deployed the monster as the vector of all things disgusting. So we represent monsters in various forms: horned, hooved, demons, devils, beasts. And Disney has, run with the idea of monsters, to great capitalist profit, I'm sure. However, I mean by the monster that which cannot be represented. that which cannot be fully captured, and that which often figures as, disgust, the abject sometimes. Um, I feel that the monster doesn't bring violence. The monster exposes violence, right? The monster exposes the violence we're already living in, right? It's just like the psychological principle of desensitization. If you enter a room that is odorous, that is smelling horribly, you immediately sense it. You're like, that's horrible. But if you stay there a while, you become part of the furniture. You're like, it's gone because you're part of it immediately. Now, normativity, how we shop, how we think, how we greet each other, how we train our children, the presumptions about progress and growth and development and expansionism, all of these form a sensorium, right? Capitalism deploys senses in a way, and we are in this sensorium. Now, all the things that are bursting through are all the things we name as trouble. Climate chaos. Oh, let's get rid of it. But the monster is not the bringer of violence. The monster is the exposition on violence, the violence of the normative. We are living in violence. We just gotten used to living habitually in it, right? And that is what these eruptions are exposing to us. Pandemic. Let's get rid of the pandemic and get back to normal. But normal is pathological. So I think we're living in a time of the monstrous, of eruptions. And these eruptions are inviting us to do something different. We can do one of two things. We can get back to the normative, which would be getting back to a violent rendering and an oppressive apartheid-based system of using the planet and the world and other kinds of bodies as fodder for the dreams of white supremacy and the dreams of you know, um, transcendence. And now it seems that the universe or the world is communicating by discommunicating through cracks and telling us it is time to do something else. That is my brief abstract of a story about what's happening these days.
Mhm. What I love is the monster doesn't bring the violence, but it shows us the violence that's already here. I find
Yeah.
this amazing. And what I hear from you, in other words, is in that in times of crisis, we see what we were in all the time, but we didn't see it anymore.
Yeah.
And so now it's breaking open. And when there is no other chance for change, it changes in that way. And then we call it, oh, now it's terrible, but it was
Mhm.
actually, there were already many signs on the way to terrible.
Yeah. We're already living in it. We've just been desensitized. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. So maybe you can speak a little bit about this process of desensitizing or resensitizing, both, like
Mhm.
how we become part of the smelly room and how we become aware that we are in a smelly room once we are part of that smelly room.
Yes, yes, yes. Another way to speak about this, because what I like about our conversations is that both of us are trained in psychology and in the clinical arts and all of that. Um, and yet there is a felt sense that we cannot think about psychotherapy or psychopathology or clinical psychology or any of those sciences as divorced from politics or economics or geophilosophy. We have to think these things together. It is it is increasingly difficult, if not downright impossible and morally repugnant to even think these things apart, right? So when I speak about healing or wellness or transformation, I must speak about politics. I must, because the selves are not apolitical or ahistorical. We are multidimensional, as of course you brilliantly articulate in your work, Thomas. So speaking about desensitization or resensitization, I often like to speak about doors and cracks. And maybe the way that I would enter it this time is to say that I'm maybe, with regards to the ways that we're trying to address these problems, these springing up upheavals, these eruptions, the ways that we're trying to address racial injustice or genocide or climate collapse or pandemics or the decline in democratic trust or the rise of proto-fascist impulses or the prospects of the United States, where I'm at right now, devolving into a civil war, the ways that all these things are addressed is to find a solution, right? Techno-bureaucratic solution, a new app, a conference. I'm not downplaying these things, but if you can get a handle on it, it's probably a door. And I'm wary about doors, brother, and doorways, because doors and doorways are architecturally anticipated. They're already built into the structure.
Mm-hmm.
They're already part of the logic of what already pre-exists or exists. No need to put a pre. They're already built into the logic of what exists, right? They grant exits and access. They swing in and out, right? Even leaving the house is still being part of the house. There's something about doors that preserve the logic of the structures that they're built into. But the thing that isn't anticipated, cracks are not anticipated. No
Mm-hmm.
architect designs cracks, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can't design a crack. Cracks are design's ecstasy. They erupt. They are the excess of architecture. They erupt and they are unanticipated. I feel that most of our solutions preserve the prevailing logic. So desensitization for me, brother, is having a curious and a cautious suspicion about um, solutions. There's some way that all the solutions that we offer seem only to just move the pieces around, but cracks are not guarantees. They're processual. They're not recipes. They're not like this is a guarantee, this is a deeper guarantee or a spiritual bypass or something. No, they're an invitation to stay with the trouble. But cracks themselves are the instigations of the monstrous. They're signs that the world, you're going to use Deleuze and his idea of bodies without organs. That is, that is bodies as foreground are always framed within a background that cannot be backgrounded, a background of constantly chaotic, immanent, vitalist, and animist, becomings, that we are not divorced from these Brownian fields of chaos. We may gain order in an arrangement for a short while, but we are always indebted to these more than human flows, if you will. These are the bodies without organs. And those bodies with that body without organs or organs without bodies often send emissaries into order. They send ambassadors into the state of order, right? And these emissaries look like monsters. They are the things that we cannot account for. They are the things that we don't know how to name. They elicit disgust, fear. We recoil from them. But if we stay with them, we will notice ourselves for the first time. So
Mm-hmm.
desensitization is a coming to the monstrous. And resensitization is playing and experimenting with the body of the monster and allowing the monster to shapeshift us. We're not talking about healing here. We're talking about mapping new realities, which is my concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful. Even though I think we were trained a bit differently, but I think we are surfing in a way in the same space
Right.
because I very much like what you just said. I mean, just to frame it maybe in different words, but when I hear you talk about the cracks, I think like what's the capacity of us to be in the discomfort of a changing world when parts of us don't want to change.
Yes.
Because in fluidity, those cracks don't crack. So when something cracks, so you have cracks in concrete walls, you have cracks in streets, you have cracks in the non-moving aspect of reality, cracks appear as a kind of a disturbance. Now I need to fix the road, I need to fix my house, and to bring it back to normal. But I think the essence of the nature of a crack is also that I am used to a non-changing reality that I get so used to that the crack actually wakes me up
Mm-hmm.
to, oh, what just
Yes.
happened? And then I have a chance maybe to rethink if I want to bring my house back to normal or if I want to change my house. And that's lovely. So I want us to speak a little bit about, because at least as it appears to me, in those moments when reality needs to crack in
Mm-hmm.
order to show us the desensitization, um, I'm wondering what's with our capacity, or how do we build capacity to be in that and not try to fix it back into the house that I knew? And
Mm-hmm.
what is conducive for us? Because I think what you're speaking about is a tremendous capacity of our time, whatever capacity means here, because that can also be kind of a preformed idea.
Yes.
But um, but I think there's so much about becoming, coming in touch with the deeper space and you said something very beautiful. First of all, again, I want to tell you that every time you have this poetic flow of words through you, it always touches me deeply. It's like it creates like such a lovely warmth and connection. It feels very lovely. So thank you for that. And
Thank you, brother.
and you said something, at least as I remember it, the background that doesn't want to be backgrounded.
Mm,
I
mm.
love that. And maybe you can share a little bit about the background that doesn't want to be backgrounded, and what's the skill not to try to fix the reality back to normal, but to be able to allow new realities to emerge. I think that's very, very foundational.
It is
Like,
fun. I feel that question. Beautiful. No, you're going to say something, brother. Did you complete?
no, that's it. I want to hear you. Mhm.
Okay. So maybe I often like to scaffold my responses. When we think about cracks, you think it, the idea of a crack, especially within our modern sensibility, is to fix it is to put it back together, right? It's cracked. That's an inadequacy. That's some kind of impoverishment. That is that is a problem. And so the thing to do is to try to put it back together. And my mind immediately is drawn to kintsugi, this Japanese
Mhm.
this Japanese art form, right? I think one apocryphal account of how the art took off was some kind of leader, an authoritarian figure, a chief of course, in Japan, um, or was it in China? I can't remember, but I think it was in Japan, broke a precious pot, a teapot, and I don't think he had access to Amazon to just order a new.
Right.
Should have been the easiest thing to do. I don't know why he didn't do that, you know. But he decided to send his underlings to to a town to go get it fixed. And the people who brought it back to brought a solution just stapled the thing back to it, and it was so ugly, right? He said there must be another way of holding space for the brokenness of this precious item. And then others came up with the art form, right, of applying gold lacquer to it. And
Mhm.
it was such a beautiful thing that the art form took off, that some artisans, ceramists would take pots and break them intentionally to create cracks, right? It started to be that it started to feel like the crack was the thing they were after, not the wholeness, but the crack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that almost creates an involution of expectations. It's a poetic shift, right? That might invite us to notice, quite shockingly and surprisingly, that cracks precede the things that are cracked, right? That it's a chaos that gives birth to the wholeness, right?
Mm-hmm.
In their refusal to fix, because the gold lacquering is not a fixing, it is more like a mapping of the space. And I love the idea of refusing to fix the cracks. And this kind of spills into Deleuzian, Guattarian philosophy and these continental philosophers that I'm really intrigued by: Henry Bergson, Gregory Bateson, all these people, Walter Benjamin. They suggest, especially Deleuze and Guattari, they suggest that desire is not lack. And I think of cracks as errant desire. Like
Mm-hmm.
the world is this desirous thing, and it cannot be corralled, it cannot be called, it cannot be captured, it cannot be predefined. It is this open-ended, majestic exploration of itself, right? And so desire, in psychoanalysis, Lacanian psychoanalysis, is treated as poverty. When you desire something, you're lacking something. But Deleuze and Guattari were like, no, desire is a world-producing force. Cracks are not things, inadequacies. They are the eruptions of things that cannot be fit into an arrangement, right? They are ecological forces. So you ask this beautiful question then, how do we develop the capacity to stay within this field of experiments that isn't about fixing things, but is about staying with the cracks? I think storytelling is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Storytelling. And here's what I mean by that. That I don't think of capacity as individuated skill. Like, oh, it's now my capacity. I don't think of capacity in that way. I
Mm-hmm.
think of capacity in terms of the scholarly word term affectivity. And affectivity is the capacity to be in response with, right? It's always a relational thing. It's not something that can be reduced to an isolated modern subject, you know. So when I think of capacity, I'm thinking about a milieu, like a topos, a ground of calling into, right? And I think calling, the insight, the skill sets around libating a space, creating a space that says, hold on, folks, don't just rush into the solution yet. Let us hold each other in this trouble together. That takes storytelling. It takes a little bit of eldering, what I'll call eldering. That is, in my tradition, the elders held this sacred space of weirdness. The elder is not just the old person, the elder is the weird person. His ways, it's crazy in a very affectionate way, not
Mm-hmm.
crazy in a pathological way, but crazy in the sense that the whole village is fighting and the elder is laughing in the background, and they come close and the elder slaps everyone's faces and tells them to go fetch a pail of water. And then it nullifies everything that has been going. It doesn't solve the problem, but the elder is always a way out of the binary, right? So there's something about eldering and storytelling and the vocation of public intellectualism that adds to the constellation of practices that might help a bubble. And I don't want to think of it as a bubble, but let me think of it as an ecology of practices to emerge that is not about solutions, that is about cultivating a shared response to crisis, that is about staying in those troubles. Maybe I could give you a very quick example, brother. I think we've discussed Fernand Deligny. Fernand Deligny was this French visionary uh, author who actually inspired Deleuze and Guattari. You know, he was a contemporary. He worked in the 1960s after the Second World War, or during the Second World War. Lots of people died in the asylums,
Mm.
especially children. 40,000 and more were allegedly killed off because they were not given food. Of course, in those times, the idea, I say in those times as if it's not still present now, but in those times especially, the idea of a perfect human being, a normative, perfect structure inspired by Nazi-led regimes was very, very obvious. And so children who were on the spectrum, who were autistic or who were schizophrenic, were thrown, even by their parents, in the asylum. Fernand Deligny took them out. He took them out, and in the 60s, in the south of France, in a very rustic region, near mountains in a town called Cévennes, he started this visionary camp. And parents started to bring their children to him, right? Their autistic children. And the idea against psychoanalytic traditions wasn't to fix the children. He did not, these children were not speaking with their voices, languages that neurotypical minds could hear.
Mhm.
But he decided no one else is going to speak in the camp, including myself. We're not going to use voices. We're just going to accompany these children.
Mhm.
And that was the space. That's the space of storytelling I'm talking about, and eldering, and accompaniment, right? They built this camp and they followed these kids everywhere they went. They didn't talk. No one used language. They just traced. They did some tracing together and they created maps as they moved around the space. Let me end with this, brother, to your response. And sorry I've taken so long because it's such an exciting
It's
question.
amazing. Just keep going. It's lovely. I'm enjoying it.
One of the kids, um, Jean-Marie, um, was known to go around in circles. Would just go around in circles. And of course, Deligny had instructed his accomplices not to try to control the children or not to think of them as wild or needing discipline. Sometimes those kids would take plates in the kitchen and throw them on the floor. And Deligny would say, well, if a tree did that, you would not think of the tree as criminal. Think of this as a poetic moment. It was deep entrainment, is what I'm trying to say. It was very, very radical work. At some point, some of the kids will go around into the fields. They will just go around in circles like Jean-Marie. They'll go around in circles. Now, a lot of present day practices like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, tries to reduce autistic symptoms, like stimming. Let's reduce all of those things so that you can blend into polite society. They didn't do this. Those kids would go around, and then they found out later that it seemed like those kids were listening to underground water. They were tracing underground water as they were going and moving through the region, something that the experts couldn't hear, those autistic children could hear. This is not a romanticization of autism. I do not speak in the cadence of or in the spirit of autistic children are superheroes. My son is autistic. But there's something about following or radical accompaniment that cultivates capacities to be with, right? That is an invitation to be with. And so long as those capacities form a constellation of radical hospitality, something new starts to emerge. Something new finds support to grow and take root.
Mm.
I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I want to come back to the background that doesn't want to be
Oh,
backgrounded.
yes, yes,
But
yes.
I will get to that in a moment. I just want to respond to because first of all, thank you for this. This was beautiful. And and what I also hear is like a more radical devotion to the relational quality. I love what you said because I often say, like, purpose is not your own thing, doing your own thing. Purpose is a shared space. It's like there's a deeply relational process because modern purpose becomes my career versus it's an embedded property of the whole and it is an
Mhm.
ecosystemic
Oh,
property. Yeah. And so I love how you said it before. And maybe before we come to the background, I want us to speak a little bit about because I'm very much into, okay, we like how we work on trauma, individual, ancestral, collective, but the difference between that and creating a society that actually
Mm.
needs a painkiller for every little detail of discomfort, and we don't want to have any discomfort, because what I hear you saying is also that we need to be willing to be in the discomfort to do something that you just said. That's not just, okay, let's do a nice project for kids. That's
Yes,
like,
yes,
can we stay with the discomfort where my normative self wants to regulate everything and allow something new to happen? And
yes,
I'm curious to hear you speak about that moment when we allow enough discomfort in us to arise, that the space can open up, that new possibilities can arise.
yes,
And
yes,
because we are a part, at least a part of our societies is about shutting down the discomfort, when in fact in the discomfort there's a very important process happening
yes.
that we kind of stop every time we want to have it back to normal. Maybe you can speak a little bit to that discomfort and the moment of, oh, space is opening up.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
With the um I was partly trained. I don't want to put it that way. Maybe I was inspired, not trained, by Yoruba shamanic workers, healers,
Mhm.
babalawos, right? They they inform and they kind of inform my view of even the very closeted psychotherapeutic clinical setting encounter. I've never seen it as one to one. I've never seen it. I find it very hard to think of it as therapist to client. It's
Mhm.
and it's because of how the posture of these men, they're mostly men that I worked with, and how they met the moment. They invited me to watch some of their sessions.
Mhm.
This many years ago. They would, for instance, they would inquire not about the client that is seated in front of them. The person that was seated in front of them was less the concern than the ecology the client was coming with,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Just like you
Mhm.
say, and I'm going to write that down, brother. It's such a beautiful thing. Purpose, not as my thing and my career, but as a shared vocation, right? They constantly leaned away from the client to ask about the river, the client is living near, if something has been done there, or an ancestor or something. And when they consulted the Ifa oracle, some of the results of some of the voices that came up seemingly had nothing to do with the person that was there in front of them. Like in 1862, your grand great grand uncle pissed in a river, something like that. It's just,
Mhm.
what has that got to do with me? Well, everything. You have never been isolated from these
Mhm.
streams of
Mhm.
gestures. So, um, when I think about this very, very, again, I want to think about what you're talking about, as a geophilosophical gesture. It is not individuals coming together to come up with a nice project for kids, as you say. It is, when I say geophilosophical, it is earth instigated, right?
Mhm.
And if it is earth instigated, it is already more than human. Maybe this is why Fernand Deligny named his experiments tentatives, which is a way of saying it is tentative. There's no guarantee that this project will last till tomorrow. There's no guarantee that anyone here will develop capacity. But for now, the spaciousness and the room is made available. It will crash in the next 10 years, or maybe in the next 5 years. I don't know. So he called all his exercises tentatives. I have one very, very intriguing story about, what was it? Is it Pink Floyd? Pink Floyd. I think it's Pink Floyd. The rock band. Yeah. I may be getting this wrong, but someone told me that they sent money. They often sent money to Deligny. I don't know how true this is. I really
Uh-huh.
through this because this ended in the 1990s. He died in 1996, September 18, right? But I think some celebrities would send. I may be wrong about this. I need to check my literature, but people sent money to Delaney to keep him alive. Even finances and resources is needed for this kind of work
Mhm.
to create. So I'm being very, very real and down to earth. When we speak about capacity to create and for discomfort to rise and find hospitality instead of oppression or repression, then
Mhm.
we're talking about more than human instigations. We're talking about um, ecological affordances. We're talking about other kinds of constraints, but it is never reducible to humans and their skill sets. It is always a matter of whether other things at large are going to be available for that plant, that new sprouting to take root, right? So this is what it looks like to me, brother. Like we're trying to craft a village where the monster is finds a hotel room instead of a jail cell, and to the best of our abilities, with our storytelling, with eldering, with staying together, with even the very material practices of washing each other's feet and instigating those practices of sharing with each other. And there are many tools and techniques that I can speak about that might go into preserving this kind of ephemeral community. Including a carnival, which is something I'm exploring with my people now. There are many ways to make the monster, um, the monster or the discomfort at home. But that is no guarantee, brother, because something might change in the atmosphere and the monster is no longer welcome and it has to go away. It has to go back into the expansiveness it came from. So this is always an exercise in tenderness. It's always
Mhm.
an exercise in tentativity, as Delaney would put it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it also says that we don't create a story from the monster either. Like we are, it stays an emergent process. It stays the process unfolding, and I
Yes.
think the skill to notice in our awareness. I mean, that's what many awareness practices are about: to notice how we fixate reality moment to moment, and how to slowly open that fixation to be able to see more, also how those limitations and normative realities limit the way how much we see and we perceive in
Yes.
this sensory movement. That's
Yes.
beautiful. Maybe a few words on, and then you said something beautiful, how the discomfort finds hospitality.
Yes. How discomfort finds hospitality.
That's beautiful.
This is in my work what I call making sanctuary. Like making sanctuary is what I think of as creating those conditions, which is never human instigated. Again, it doesn't start with humans saying, hmm. Like even trauma is a geophilosophical force. It's
Mhm.
an earth, it's streams. It's not limited to human subjectivity. As you and I know, land can feel pain and can transmit
Mhm.
energies as well. Furniture can be a vector for transmitting energies. It's never about humans. It's about a space. It's about a field of thresholds and intensities and edges, right? So these failures and these pains and these hurts and these things that are still traveling in the air can often instigate wisdom and can inspire and move someone to say, hey, let me create room for a monster, or let me do this, right? I'm trying to trace out a history that does not begin with humans making changes on the world, which is a very modern, liberal, humanist fantasy. That it starts from me and I change the world. It already creates another binary as if the world is outside and I'm
Exactly.
inside. You know,
Exactly. Exactly.
you change the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
For discomfort to thrive, it takes a parliament of conditions coming together. And this is not easy per se, or rather, I would say is It's not easier said than done. It's easier done than said. I'm going to use this phrasing of a brother called Rael Miller. It's easier done than said. And this doing is not human. The reason why it's easier done than said is because saying it is a very human thing to do, but doing it is what the world, constantly makes happen. So it's neither difficult or easy. It's just a doing that transcends human agency, but includes human agency. And maybe I can speak to this backgrounding thing here.
Mm-hmm.
The question about
Mm-hmm.
how did I put it? The background that
It,
wants to,
it doesn't want to be backgrounded.
yes, brother. Again, we're blasting out into the atmosphere without leaving it completely behind in order to take this positionality, this bird's eye view that allows us to notice that the history of modernity is the history of the rehabilitation of monsters,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are constantly, we're constantly rehabilitating monsters, or what I call specifically in my work, monsters adjacent. And I don't want to get into the weeds about the distinction here for now, except to say that rehabilitation often enacts a politics of violent inclusion, right? Immigrants go through this, right?
Mm-hmm.
The stolen bodies across the African continent went through this. It's you're wild, you're not quite human, we will rehabilitate you, right? We will make you presentable. There's something colonizing and colonial about the ways that a politics of rehabilitation works. I'm not pathologizing that either. I'm just saying it's a dangerous instigation of colonial ethics, right? And what what is most rehabilitated within modern civilization seems to be nature, right? We're constantly taking a little piece of that and gentrifying. James Hillman, the archetypal psychologist, would speak about, the wilds, the anima mundi, that we're always trying to um, stabilize or clear or build a gutter into. Something like that. We're constantly dragging monsters from the deep and trying to interpret them. This is the reason why he was against interpretation, right? Because interpretation is kind of pinning things down to the familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, oh, you dreamt of a horse in your dream. Here's the interpretation. We constantly take things and then we tag it to what we already know. It's not bad, it's not good, it's dangerous, it's risky because it risks perpetuating it spreads the empire of the already known, the fully known. And that is how rehabilitation often works. So when I speak about the background that wants to be that has always been included. I'm speaking about the things we rudely call nature, the things that we exteriorize as background. The human agency and human politics and human accountability happens on the human stage. The world is just the wall paint, against which all these dramatic things happen. But now, brother, and we're back to where we started. We are in a time when the stage is now an actor. It's not just the thespians on the stage any longer. The stage is an actor. And the background is now playing a foreground role. It's sending viruses. And we're like, ooh, we thought we are all about sending things and we're unable to deal with it. I humorously ask people, um, who is powerful enough in the world to have sent everybody to their homes for an entire year? Is it Obama? Is it a pope? I'm thinking about which human authority can stand out and say, for the year 2020, no one steps out of their homes, right? What could have instigated that would make everyone instantly comply? It wasn't the state governments, even though they gave the imperatives. That could not have been possible without the coming in of this tiny critter that we call the coronavirus, right? And I'm trying to say that sometimes when the monster comes in, our capacity is habituated into shutting it down. The coronavirus exposed the inadequacies of a public health system, but it went beyond that. It exposed the inequities in world order. It exposed the inequities and the disequilibrium in how bodies are governed. So the violence has always been in. We're back to where we started. The violence has always been in. And the way that transformation happens is when the world sends in emissaries, right, through cracks and the monstrous. It is our work to try to create space for the monster to live. And if we do so without trying to rehabilitate the monster, but just radically accompanying it, we might happen upon new realities.
Fantastic, fantastic. And given what you just said, it's beautiful. It's like if the stage becomes an actor, which I
Yes.
very much think that I mean, that is what's happening or what's
Yeah.
happening all the time. We're just realizing. But that I'm wondering about if you can speak a little bit to that the loss of biodiversity is not just happening outside.
Mm.
That the loss of biodiversity has in your sense, because you laid it beautifully here, to reconsider it's not just a few species that die somewhere there. If there is no they are there, because now the stage is an actor, an actress too. And the second thing I would love us to, because you spoke beautifully about nature, I would love us to speak a little bit to kind of the enormous violence in animal farming.
Mm, mm,
Like, because we're talking about kind of being desensitized,
yeah,
and we are living in a system where I think something unbelievable is going on all the time. But
yes,
it's kind of, it became part of this kind of wall painting that you described before. And I think what we are seeing right now, when the stage is an actor and actress itself,
yes,
so that becomes much more evident right now, or it
yes.
can become much more evident. And I would like us to include that. So maybe you speak a little bit about loss of biodiversity is not just something that happens around us, in that sense, and what are the implications of that, plus the way I think the misunderstanding between oppressing and stewardship,
Mm,
here in terms of animal farming. Maybe you can say a
mm,
few words.
okay. You know, maybe this is an example that comes to mind. I'm sure there are many examples, but I've been repeating this one because it's very, very, it commends itself to my speaking habits and to the way that I like to connect things to each other. So there is no outside, right? I think there is no outside. The architecture of our everyday life does try to tell us that there is, though, right? It tries to remind us that it's okay. You just have your to-do list, wake up, join the train, get to work, build a life for yourself. And then occasionally, if you find on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC that something is happening around the world, if you have $1 or two to spare, then send it down to them. Be good people, be good, be nice. Yeah, and that kind of, even I've been telling people, even solidarity, even the practices that ethnographically connect to our conceptualization of solidarity still preserve a sense of violence and violent individuality, right? Um, so I've been speaking about the loss of tigers in Indonesia and orangutans in Indonesia, right? How are they dying? They're dying because giant oil companies in an act in these industrially established patterns have this don't ask, don't tell pattern of decimating entire forests, right? With people in the area, they decimate entire forests and extract oil, not crude oil, but vegetable oil, which in turn goes into making the food products that we're endeared to. The donut world, is there such a thing as a donut world? But donuts, Krispy Kreme, Dunkin' Donuts depend heavily on this multi-billion-dollar globalizing framework. Every time you bite a donut, as sweet, this is how capitalism is connected to our senses, right? The new smell of a car, the aesthetic of a new iPad, there's the modern aesthetic. We are entrained into feeling aroused by these things, right? You touch an iPad, you say, "Ooh, I love those curves." Or you you touch what's this? What's Tesla? It's like, "Ooh, look at that Tesla." It appeals to our eyes, it's not foreign. It's immediately endearing and attractive and magnetic. And then when you buy yourself a copy, I said a copy. When you buy yourself a Tesla, you tell yourself, "I'm doing good for the environment." But it could be an entrainment within capitalist sensation, right? So I tell people that every time you bite a donut, you're igniting the webs of suffering that destroy tigers and their ecologies and orangutans in Asia, right? That is not my way of shaming people and saying, stop eating donuts, because if I were to do that, people might immediately feel a sense or a need to rush into a sense of righteousness. You know what? From today, I am not going to eat donuts. That's probably going to save a few tigers or two, maybe collectively. But it doesn't quite drive the point home that we are all enamored with and entrained with and entangled with infrastructures of decimation and death. We live in, the words of Achille Mbembe come to mind, we live in a necropolitics, a death-dealing politics that is premised on the denial of life and the subjugation of species and even human others, right? So that is how the loss of biodiversity has never been outside. I imagine someone who cares, an activist who cares in the United States or somewhere in Europe, biting a donut and like, oh, I care about these tigers on television. Yum, yum. I need to send a few dollars or euros. Yum, yum. It just creates this field of tensions that reinforces this necropolitical cycle of death. Um, and then, to your question about, oh, I can't remember where I was going. I played too much with this. The other part of what you were saying, brother, remind me about that.
Was the animal farming?
Animal farming. I think the ways that food is, it comes down to what we term food, brother. I don't think food is a thing on our plates. I don't think food is just that on our plates. Food is not an object. Food is a process, right? Food is an ecological process, right? It's less about what it arrives at as much as than it, or rather, it's less about what it arrives at than it is about how we arrive there. It's less a what and more a how. And this is why animal farming, um, which I must confess, I am only getting to be intimately exposed to as I move through the global north. We don't have vast animal farming structures in Nigeria, for instance, where I grew up. In fact, it's even sorrier than that because we import most of our things. Since we are heavily dependent on notions of development and GDP, we've kind of stopped producing for ourselves. So I grew up in a subservient nation state that is still subservient, that largely eats because of the benevolence that comes with strings attached of the global north, right? But as I move through the world, I'm coming to be exposed to the terrible effects of animal farming. That hasn't led me to say I'm going to stop eating meat. Meat eating is a tradition, um, intricately tied with my people, the Yoruba people. That is why I say it is not a what as it is a how. That how food is produced, what we term or how we position ourselves in this production of food. For instance, we resource food by damning the entire world as background, as just mere resource for our eternal expansion, or as my brothers, and siblings in indigenous cultures in America would see a deer as a spirit that is giving its life for a community. That's a different paradigm altogether. One paradigm sees food as instrument for expansion, and the other sees food as a stewarding process of mutuality, of mutual edibility. That is different. So animal farming seems to be an industrialization, an outsourcing, or an outworking of a damning Anthropocene, right? Where we are the lords of the realm and the animals are just fodder for our creation. That's what leads to food waste, brother. That's what leads to food waste. Because if we see the world as just an eternal resource for us, then we will not pay attention to ecologies. We will not pay attention to our own dying. We will not pay attention to the ways that we're imbricated in the ecologies that resource our well-being. We'll just destroy things, I've watched my mother watch food cooking programs um, on food networks, and my mother will have her hand on her head, like, they're wasting so much food. They're throwing away food. What happens to that cake? Why not give it to the next man? It's again, how food is produced is the pathology here. And what it invites us to sit with, again, is not the the rankling and the animosity about you are eating this, so there's something wrong with you. It's more about how do we trace our imbrications in industries that resource our bodies in this way. It's a how, not a what, brother.
Mm, exactly. That's beautiful. And I wholeheartedly agree. It's not about if we should eat this or that.
Yes,
It's
yeah,
about that the sensorium, as you called it, that there is a felt relationship to the entire process. And then if we bring much more collective awareness, if many of us have that on our screen, that the background is not a background, but it's a continuum, then
yes,
I think it's not about what we eat, it's more about an awareness of the process. So that's
yes,
beautifully said. And I think that's
yes,
what we want to also support all the time. Right.
brother.
That's beautiful. Bayo, I see our time. It was flying by. It's amazing. We are more than an hour here and it's fantastic. It's so interesting. And is there anything that you want to leave us with? I think it was such a beautiful journey through like many, many parts that we're both passionate about. Is there anything you think we should add?
I think nothing to be added except to just re-emphasize what you said. I feel that's a good way to end. Purpose. And I feel it's very striking for me because I grew up in this Christian world that thought of purpose as my vocation, my destiny. You have your purpose, you have your purpose. And it was almost contradictory. And I would ask questions to the pastor in our church. So is the market woman, you know, is that her purpose? Aren't we going to speak about larger economic forces? And they always shut me down. right? So I didn't really agree to the idea of a pre-designated notion of purpose. But purpose as a shared vocation is such a heartwarming, inviting vocation. It's shared. It is not yours. We are participating and enlisting our bodies in it. Thank you for that. That's a good way to end.
Thank you, Bayo. Such a pleasure. I enjoyed it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Mm.
Thanks for listening to Point of Relation with Thomas Hübl. Stay connected and get updates about new episodes by visiting our website, pointofrelationpodcast.com, and by subscribing to the Thomas Hübl YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share about us with your community on social media. Thank you. We appreciate your support.